Hey yo, it's good everyone. Twisted here with Open Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about the term anamnesis. Now, for many folks out there, I'm sure you probably haven't heard this one before, or at least in this particular verbiage or iteration. So I want to go ahead and say anamnesis, probably like, what in the hell is this man talking about? Well, in short, right? Anamnesis, as per the Merriam-Webster dictionary, means recalling to mind. So, the first time, or at least one of the first times I actually came across hearing this term, was in a video, a talk by Jonathan Peugeot, alongside another individual, a guest on his channel, named Chris Mastropietro. And the name of the talk was Magic of the Creative Process. So in this discussion, he talked about many things in regards to, how the creative process works in general, and the different sort of, functions, different sort of mental functions that occur when, you're trying to construct things, when you're trying to express oneself, what have you. And anamnesis just happened to be amongst one of those things discussed. So I definitely recommend that you go ahead and listen to the full conversation for yourself, and I'll likely provide a link in the description for you to do so. But in honing in more so on the terminology of anamnesis and recalling things, allowing them to come back, right? So if there's a recollection, right, then there has to be an initial forgetfulness, right? So if you're kind of like having a refreshment of a concept, of an idea, of a practice, of whatever sort, could be artistic, could be, of course, in magical, spiritual, occult, metaphysical manners, right? Originally you have to go ahead and let it go. You have to go ahead and forget that it happens to have been there in the first place, or just not in the forefront of your mind. So, with that initial stage being forgetfulness, right? There's another term that you're likely more so familiar with that is associated with, or at least I believe is. I have not looked up the etymology of both words, but I'm just going ahead and taking a crack in the dark and, shot in the dark, and more so just, going with an educated guess here. And that term is amnesia. So what happens when someone has amnesia, right? You go ahead and you're not able to remember something, or maybe you just aren't able to retain quite a few subjects, quite a few bits of information, and all of that. Whether it's individual pieces, and you just don't have as much of a strong memory, or maybe you get into an accident and you forget who you are in terms of your name, family members, your address, all these different aspects of your life and or personality that make you who you are, right? Not necessarily within the core of your soul or your spirit or your being, but in terms of your persona, in terms of, your conscious awareness and such within your everyday life, or at least what you believe to be yourself and that particular who you are, even if it's not necessarily in line with the core of your being and knowing thyself properly. And, speaking of knowing thyself, I know Devi has gone ahead and spoken on the topic singularly previously on the channel, and I can, of course, provide a link to that as well for you to listen in on that. But alas, I continue. Now, of course, there's a condition of amnesia, right? Where you forget things, for however long, and then, you may have a recovery period, and then, you are remembering these sorts of things once again. After maybe you could say there was some sort of nerve damage, some sort of, brain injury, and then after some recovery, you go ahead and recall these things. The connections are remade, and you can access those electromagnetic corridors within the mind once again. But, there's other conditions that are not necessarily as, forgiving, or not necessarily as temporal. There's, dementia, where it's more so ongoing and, is more so severe. Of course, that happens quite a bit within elderly folk. And that being more so a progressive thing that tends to usually lead to Alzheimer's. And that just being where pretty much as opposed to say a momentary sort of thing and potentially recoverable, these two conditions are not necessarily, and it's very hard to go ahead and hold on to a grasp or sense of who someone is in their conscious mind, what have you. And, I'm not going to go ahead and speak all too much about it in relation to anything, but I know for myself and for my family, we have gone ahead and had family members who have experienced dementia and Alzheimer's and have seen how this has affected them, and then of course by extension their interactions with people around them, including the family and friends and such. But of course, there's plenty of material on those sorts of phenomena and medical conditions. But back to the topic of anamnesis, right? So recently I kind of went ahead and came to a realization of an analogy to make is that it's kind of allowing yourself to take a mental vacation. So, when you take an actual vacation, say you're a student at school, whether it be grade school or whether it be college, or say you have a job and you're working however many months and you have days off and you decide, I'm going to take a vacation. Say you live in one city and then you're like, what, I want to go ahead a few states over and there's one town, they got a couple places I want to visit, or it just seems like a relaxing place from what I heard and all that. You go ahead and you book it and you go fly over there and or take a bus or whatever means to travel, and say they got some hot springs and maybe it's a ski resort, they got themselves a nice mountain and you can go ahead skiing, whatever the case may be, maybe a couple local attractions, right? But you're able to go ahead and remove yourself from your overall routine, and you're able to go ahead and put yourself in a new situation and allow for fresh input and different things like that, and or just not having to deal with the consistent sort of inputs that you're getting on a day-to-day basis. And this can also apply not just in that sort of particular example, right, but in terms of just daily overall things where you're allowing concepts, ideas and such to step away and not focus on them anymore, and allow for there to be a recollection later on that's spurred on by some sort of thing that brings it back, some sort of sign, some sort of thing, whatever the case may be. And lo and behold, with that time removed, you're more so refreshed from it, and may go ahead and help spur on other creative ideas or help you to take an action and all of that. Whereas maybe it was a little bit less, you were more so bogged down and more so not as inclined to go ahead and tackle that or make progress, or maybe feel like you were stagnant in that area or field of life and whatever sort of concepts and ideas were associated with it. So there's that sort of take on it that I had, but also kind of an older one as well, because I've kind of let the idea of anamnesis, go ahead and play by its actual, functionality of, it's been a while since I initially heard of it, and then I kind of am now talking about it after some time removed, and it coming back to being reminded of it, and it being a bit more refreshing at this moment in time. But the idea I kind of came up before was preparing and studying for the moment when inspiration strikes. Then going ahead and forgetting or removing the procedural approach to bring about a more so mystical or divine musing and channeling from the subconscious and or superconscious. So pretty much, right, going ahead and just, when it comes to your spiritual, your magical, your metaphysical sort of undertakings, you can go ahead and study, for example, sigils. And truth be told, there's quite a few methods that actually operate with the principle of anamnesis in mind in terms of sigil construction, and then you can burn it and all that sort of thing. I'll leave a link for a discussion we've done on sigils and symbols between Devi and I previously for more of an expansive sort of approach to that topic, but just use that as an example, right? But alas, going ahead and studying, say, I don't know, Theravada Buddhism, or some sort of other Eastern tradition of Jainism, right? Or a particular practice, say meditation, or studying, for example, a different sort of architecture, or, angelology, or whatever sort of subject matter that tickles your fancy or that you feel is in line with what you are more so suited for. You can go ahead and look into that, intake information at a whatever rate is appropriate that you feel called to do and inspired to, and then let it pass. Go back to other things. Let it do what it does and stew to ferment. You can go ahead and say that it's kind of like taking a grape off of a vine and then allowing, through the process of fermentation and taking the grape and squishing it into, a juice and all the other sort of things that allow for the, wine to be made as an alcohol and such. You take those grapes, you do the process, it's more so in liquid form, and then you allow it to ferment to go ahead and make, good tasting wine over an elongated period of time and such. And that's kind of how anamnesis goes ahead and works with concepts and ideas in many such cases. But yes, that's just a couple ideas of how I think it can be viewed in such analogies, you can say, for this. Now, what I also came across, more so of the philosophical approach to it, more so of an antiquated nature, and associated with, Plato's theory on anamnesis. And this little paragraph section I'm going to go ahead and recite comes from Wikipedia, of all places. And yes, going ahead and I'll go ahead and state it and such, and use it as a bridge towards kind of a particular sort of spiritual example of within the gears, the machinations of life as a whole, how it can apply, or at least, the connections that I'm happening to mentally make and such. So, in Plato's theory of epistemology, anamnesis refers to the recollection of innate knowledge acquired before birth. The concept posits the claim that learning involves the act of rediscovering knowledge from within oneself. This stands in contrast to the opposing doctrine known as empiricism, which posits that all knowledge is derived from experience and sensory perception. Plato develops the theory of anamnesis in his Socratic dialogues Meno, Phaedo, and Phaedrus. So yes, when it comes to how Plato went ahead and viewed anamnesis and such, I go ahead and what immediately came to mind for me in terms of spiritual, metaphysical, magical, occult, paranormal sort of things is that it falling in line with our modern Western views on how reincarnation and past life regression therapy and or methods tend to operate. So, in short, pretty much reincarnation, that's, when everything is said and done in your current lifetime, you have the different layers of oneself the physical body first, and the emotional, mental, astral, soul, spirit, and all different in-between layers, going ahead and separating, being organized, what have you, in whatever manners they happen to. And through that, right, that's a sort of anamnesis where there's a forgetfulness. You forget the particular lifetime that you went ahead and just had, and you're now having ended and starting something new at whatever point you re-enter, this particular plane of existence, or whichever plane of existence is next for you to go ahead and experience based on each individual situation that is occurring. But alas, when you get into that, right? Say you died and you come back as some kid somewhere, right? And say there's actually quite a few occurrences of this, not necessarily just in terms of like using therapeutic methods like hypnosis or anything like that, but a lot of natural occurrences of children being able to recall details of things that they shouldn't necessarily know about the deceased, and or older individuals at a previous point in time. But just as I alluded to before, in combination to that example, you can take an active approach of trying to elicit these sorts of remembrances, right, through past life regression therapy, and one that being hypnosis, but other means and manners as well, meditation, and so on. So you can do it yourself. You can go ahead and have someone spur it on for you, and allow for yourself to recall to your mind what you have forgotten from a previous lifetime and experience. Or, of course, not even just taking an active approach, but having a passive approach, that these things are brought to the forefront somehow, some way, through, going ahead and walking down the street and you see some sort of Chinese shop with different, ornaments and different sort of regalia, different sorts of, like, say there's different bull, statues, or maybe like a laughing Buddha, or, maybe they have a I Ching set in there, something like that. And then next thing you know, you start having visions in your head, or you start having inclinations or thoughts that maybe back in the day you were some sort of monk, or maybe you were some sort of, like, Asian farmer or something like that, you know what I mean? And lo and behold, right, like, you don't know where it came from beforehand, but there's some sort of inner knowing that you have some sort of experience within that particular part of the world that was at some point in time prior to your own physical incarnation lifetime. And in that sort of sense, that being a manner of anamnesis unto itself, but not harping or, continually pushing in that sort of regard all too much, I'll go ahead and move on and kind of like frame it slightly differently as we move along. But another conversation that was had that, you can go ahead and listen to prior on the channel, that is in a similar vein to us talking about anamnesis right now, is the subject of impermanence, change, and maximum weirdness, at least in regards to how our guest and friend Y King, in that particular conversation, went ahead and was addressing it as in their own personal terminology. And I will leave a link for that to go ahead and of course you can check the channel itself to manually go ahead and find it. But that in and of itself was a pretty interesting conversation that was probably one of my favorites thus far on channel and such, out of the quite a few that we've had up until this point. Another friend who I'm not going to necessarily name at the present moment, simply because we have not necessarily had them on the channel, nor have they given express permission to be mentioned, but I will share their insights from quite a while ago about, not necessarily about discussing anamnesis as a term, but kind of like it's in association and falls in lockstep with the phenomena of anamnesis and recalling the mind. And that is seeing the world through the eyes of a child, having childlike clarity of vision, an ambivalence, a sort of freshness, a fresh approach to looking at the world and experiencing things, right? And of course, like seeing the world through the eyes of a child, that sort of innocence, that sort of newness, that freshness, that can just be done with you going through different, mental, processes, going ahead and, allowing yourself to work through your own trauma and bullshit, or, maybe even through having an actual child yourself as a parent, as an adult. And in having a child, you're going ahead and, at present, I am not a father or parent myself, but in terms of how I've heard many others describe it, it is like you're going ahead and reliving childhood once again through the actual physical eyes of another, through your own child and their own wonderment and, how they view things in a more so refreshing manner that adds a little extra taste to, these sort of things that maybe you previously were already doing and considered mundane or not as exciting, and you kind of became more so calloused towards, but now you're able to go ahead and have that newness and enthusiasm, excitement towards it. And of course, that just be any sort of life experiences, but especially in any sort of creative avenues that you happen to have, right? And this more so dialing back towards the original video that I had heard the term anamnesis in, right? So pretty much this being a useful mechanism in the realm of creativity and creative expression for just understanding the natural flow of things, and in regards to inspiration, allowing that to come in. And it doesn't have to be just some sort of concept or idea that you hadn't necessarily thought of before in this lifetime, perhaps, and of course maybe in previous lifetimes, in regards to reincarnation and past life regression and such. But, just allowing for things to be reintroduced and that sort of newness and what have you. And I will go ahead and leave off the subject with, for those who participate in different sorts of magical, invocations or doing prayers or calling on different entities to assist in these regards. Just a few that I have gone ahead and interacted with and came to mind that could be useful for helping with spurring on anamnesis and or, any sorts of inspiration or just going with the flow and all that sort of thing. One of them being the Shinto kami, the Shinto goddess Benzaiten, who happens to govern over the flow, of things, water, very watery in the element, and inspiration, musing, all that sort of thing, along with, in more so of an Abrahamic sense, Archangel Israfel, who is more so in line with the Islamic sphere of Abrahamic religions and that family of Western Western belief systems. Let's go with that instead of trying to tongue-tie myself even further. And then, of course, a more so angelic entity that's way more so popular, or at least gets a lot more recognition in the Bible and being featured in it, but just across all three major Abrahamic sort of religions, is Archangel Gabriel, who governs over the element of water, but also, happens to allow for you to tap into the subconscious and the superconscious, to go ahead and pull up these things from within you that you may have forgotten and are wanting to recollect, to remember, to go ahead and bring back to the forefront and have a refreshing sort of thing, whether it's dealing with your own bullshit, your own trauma, your own things of a negative sort, or previous aspects or ideas or concepts of oneself in which you happen to have forgotten or just put to the side and can go ahead and serve you once again. And I had forgot to mention a moment ago when mentioning Archangel Israfel. Of course, there is a solo video about Archangel Israfel where I went ahead and spoke on that particular entity beforehand. And, that link can also be included as well in the description. But alas, pretty much, I'll go ahead and end this by just saying anamnesis, forgetting and recalling things. Allow yourself to go ahead, and you don't have to hold on to everything within a particular moment. Take a step away sometimes. Give things time to refresh, and then you can come back to it later on. Conceptually, and maybe in certain life situations. And you'll find that you'll be more so able to effectively integrate or incorporate or, approach whatever life happens to have for you at that moment. And I guess that's all. I'll go ahead and end it out. So this has been Twisted with Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.